Everybody,
Recording in
welcome
progress.
to Colorful Conversations. We're going to be taking a look at Bridging the Gap, Mental Health Equity for All. I am Kate Cobes, the Director of Development and Programs for the West Hartford Chamber, and I would like to welcome everybody on behalf of the Chamber. We're very excited to have an esteemed panel here to discuss the topic. I'll just give you a little bit of background about the Minority Business Network. The Minority Business Network was established to provide visibility, networking opportunities, and resources to chamber members who are also members of underrepresented racial, ethnic, and religious populations. Our mission is to provide our members with opportunities, connections, and resources. The MBN hosts a range of programming intended to increase visibility of minority-owned and represented businesses, provide a discussion forum for the unique challenges faced by minority professionals, and increase diversity among the membership. The Colorful Conversations is a quarterly panel discussion designed to take a deep dive into issues that disproportionately impact minority populations. We invite experts from across the country to educate the community on topics of interest and propose solutions to the issues faced. Past topics include healthcare, education, access to technology, and employment. The forum streams live on Zoom, on Facebook Live, and through our partnership with West Hartford Interactive TV. The recordings are then housed on the Chamber's YouTube channel. And I do want to thank our sponsor today, Liberty Bank. And for those in attendance, I would like to point out that the Q&A function is enabled. So if you do have a question that you would like to propose to our panelists, you can put it into that. But the chat is also enabled. That is more designed to give feedback. If you wanted to emphasize something that one of our panelists said or speak with other attendees, you can do that. I do want to point out that there usually is a drop-down box. So you want to make sure that you're set to everyone and not just hosts and panelists if you want your fellow attendees to be able to see. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Christopher Clark. Christopher Clark is our moderator today. He's also the chairperson of the West Hartford Chamber's Board of Directors and the founder and chairman of the Minority Business Network. He's a private client advisor with Key Investment Services. In this role, he's responsible for connecting high net worth individuals and institutions to strategies that can help them reach their financial goals. He graduated from Brooklyn College with a bachelor's degree in psychology. He also graduated from the University of Connecticut with a Master of Business Administration, concentrating in finance and management. A native of Brooklyn, New York, Chris began financial services career in 1998. He relocated to the greater Hartford area in 2002 and joined KeyBank in August of 2024. In his free time, Chris loves cooking. Chris is also a single dad who resides in West Hartford with his 3 daughters. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another colorful conversation. And I want to start off by saying, please bear with me if I geek out a little bit, because this is something I'm incredibly passionate about. As Kate mentioned earlier, my undergraduate degree was in psychology. And when I think about what I do for a living and all the things I do in the community, psychology is a linchpin for all of it. I was obsessed with psychology as a kid because I like meeting new people. I liked hearing interesting stories, and I liked helping people find answers to their questions. And you fast forward almost 30 years, and that's what I continue to do. And I'm really, really excited to have this panel of experts, right? Some of whom I have had, sit down conversations with and pick their brains about their expertise, and some of whom I'm going to be meeting and listening to for the first time. And so with that put out front, I think it makes sense for them to introduce themselves to you. And we'll start with Jackie. So Jackie, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the public.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Jackie Davis. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Workplace Mental Health and DEI at Mental Health Connecticut. I've been doing this work for just shy of 10 years with MHC, and I'm very happy to be here and to engage with all of you today.
Thank you, Jackie. Latanya, how about you?
Hi, Chris. My name is Latanya King. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I own a private practice in Avon, Connecticut, Hope Life Behavioral and Wellness Services, LLC. I've been a nurse for over 20 years. I've been in mental health and behavioral health for over 14 of those years. I'm also have hospital affiliations and work in different hospitals, providing various treatments for mental health at the Institute of Living, St. Francis Hospital, and Johnson Memorial Hospital.
Thanks, Latanya. And Siobhan.
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here today. My name is Siobhan Sims. I'm a licensed professional counselor working at Inner Wellness Counseling Group in Manchester. I have been a therapist for about 10 years now, graduated from the University of St. Joseph in West Hartford in 2014. I work primarily with children and adolescents and young adults with a concentration in trauma, conduct disorders, anxiety, and depression. And I look forward to this conversation today.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing your background. And I think it makes sense to just dive into it. And the first question I have is one that's going to touch on a personal note. How did you get here? You know, what led you to this field and this course of study in particular? And you can jump in where whoever decides to take the question first.
Well, I can jump in.
Oh, you really going deep already?
That's how we do over here. That's how we do.
Yeah, I can jump in
Go
because I
ahead.
think I'm a little different from the two of you where I am not licensed in mental health. I am a trainer, I'm an instructor, I'm a facilitator. So that's where my expertise is. It's more research and sharing and educating and opening up conversations. I have been working in the mental health field, so to speak, in that regards, probably for 16 years supporting nonprofits, but at MHC for about 10. I actually started in TV broadcasting of all things. So I've been on a very interesting journey going from ESPN to nonprofit worlds. But as soon as I found my home at MHC and being able to connect with mental health professionals, seeing the work that they do on a day-to-day basis, helping people be able to live authentically and thrive and be their best selves, it just felt like home. So I have that interesting little journey, but I'm really curious about the two of you being actual mental health professionals in that right. And thank you for the work that you do. So I want to pass it off to one of you.
Okay, I guess I'll take it. I tell people all the time that I think that this profession found me. I remember being in second grade and we were reading a story in a book called The Discovery Series. And it was a lot of mini series about different professions and different people. And I remember reading this one story about a man going to a therapist or a young man going to a therapist. And I said, I think I can do that. And that's really where the seed was planted for me to become a therapist. And as I got older, I noticed that people would just talk to me about things. I was curious about people. I was curious about their history, especially being an immigrant. You know, my family, my parents are from Barbados. I was born in Barbados and I migrated to the United States when I was about 5 or 6 years old. So coming into the US, I think that I had a different perspective or story on culture, the US culture, American culture, and things of that nature. And as I got older, I was just drawn to people, drawn to their stories. And I said I always wanted to be a therapist. At first, I said I wanted to be a psychologist, and then I said I wanted to work with DCS. I wanted to work with families and reuniting families, because again, being an immigrant, at one point I was separated from my family, my parents, before coming to the U.S. So I had a feel of what that separation was like. And as I got older, my career actually diverted, because I was working at McDonald's and I thought that was going to be the next best thing. And I started to pursue my undergraduate degree in business in business management and administration, until I was asked to mentor to a group of young pregnant moms. And as I was doing that, I remembered being in second grade, and I remembered that feel of being a therapist and being a helper, working in the helping profession. And I graduated with my undergraduate from Albertus Magnus. And next semester, I was enrolled at the University of St. Joseph in West Hartford pursuing my degree in clinical mental health counseling. So I think that I always had a passion and a burden to work with children, and it got lost along the way, but I'm glad that I found it and I'm back on track to doing what I think I was called and purposed to do.
Wow, that's amazing. Latanya, how about you?
That's amazing. Yeah. Um, so my journey was, it was weird to me, but it kind of started off, I needed a change. I was working as a registered nurse at Hartford Hospital as in orthopedics, specifically in total joint. I was doing that for about 5 or 6 years. Um, and I kind of got into it's this thing where it calls nurses eat your young. And I kind of was having some issues with a nurse there. So my mom worked for the Department of Children and Families for, at that time, well over 20 years. And she encouraged me to apply for, it was Connecticut Children's Place then, but it's Sonnet Center North Campus now. And it was dealing with children with mental and behavior health issues in a residential type of background or field. So obviously this is completely different. I'm bone, dealing with bone and joint. And I was like, okay, I do like kids. Maybe this is something that will be for me. And it was. I definitely took to it. And it's also, especially my journey, I got to see mental health, but from the root, from the beginning. So dealing with children with various mental health disorders, especially with trauma, that piqued my interest. I'm a type of person, I get bored very easily. Typical West Indian, multiple jobs. So I had like a million jobs, but one of the jobs that I worked at was the Hospital Central Connecticut and the acute behavior unit. And that's where my fascination and passion for mental health grew even more. Because you get a conglomerate of different patients. You get your home. So my assignment would look like I would have the typical homeless people that will come in around the same time, who are very intoxicated, or they're on a substance and they're withdrawing from something. You'll get an 8-year-old who's having some behavior health issues. You might get a group home patient, and you might get a patient who's having their first psychotic break. So you have to learn very quickly. And it definitely paired with my personality. And from there, I was like, okay, this is not enough. So I continued to further my education. I got my master's in nursing education through Capella. I did the online because at the time I had my son, so I couldn't really attend school in person. And then from there, it was actually a good friend of mine who's a nurse practitioner. She encouraged me to go back to school along with my husband. So that's when I started my journey to become a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And then from there, the doors just continued to open. Treating people in an FQHC, the poorest of the poorest. And then also I've worked at Newport Academy, where the average salary of the parents are like 300,000. I've seen it in so many different realms. And I'm glad that even 20 years later, my passion is still growing. And I just feel like I have so much to do. So that's my story.
Wow. So really diverse starting points, really diverse journeys, but ultimately, a passion to help people. It seems to be the common thread for everybody on the panel, right? Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing and kind of what led us to wanting to have this conversation, the current mental health landscape. I was, I have this thing where I have an information addiction, so I tend to read a lot and consume a lot of information, particularly around this subject. And something I read recently really hit me. And they were saying, according to a 2023 study by the Kaiser Family Foundation, about 23%, almost 1 in 4 Americans, has sought out some sort of mental health care in the past 3 years. Immediately my mind goes pandemic. But what factors do you think have led to such a significant percentage of Americans to seek out support?
I mean, one of the obvious is COVID. I think just dealing with such an adjustment. I think what contributed to that is just the isolation, the rapid turnover to just quickly adjust. I think it it was a lot of fear that also was created, and also us just the fear of just not knowing. I think that definitely was a catalyst that made it a lot worse for the mental health profession from my standpoint. My I know for other jobs, I know maybe because theirs was really supply and demand, or it was really about being in person. A lot of mental health providers, we were losing our minds. Our numbers and referrals were way more than we could handle. I think at the time, my numbers, I probably had like 150 clients. From the pandemic on, it probably jumped more than double. It's been pretty rough since then.
Wow. And so as you say that, and before we get to somebody else's perspective, the jump in numbers, and how did you handle that? Because that's something that, like, a lot of my friends who are in the profession, you know, yourself included, like, I've had this conversation where, uh, you know, they particularly walking out of the pandemic, maybe like a year or two into the pandemic, really, like they saw a significant jump. Like one of my friends in a southern hospital in Connecticut was saying, hospital in Southern Connecticut was saying that they went from seeing like maybe, you know, 6 kids in the course of a week to them having an emergency room filled with 25 kids. So how were you handling that kind of jump?
Well, it definitely, I had to, I'm a very, I'm such a Virgo. I like things a certain type of way. So I like control. And for me, when I got inundated with all these referrals, I felt like I was losing control in the sense of I'm a very caring person and I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing is not compromised because my caseload is increasing. So at that time, I was a director of behavioral health in Massachusetts, and I had to make a radical decision to like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do a 9 to 5 and then just see a small clientele of patients in my private practice. I ended up quitting. I ended up quitting to make myself more available, working for myself, even with the financial just not knowing what was going to happen, but the ability to care with so many numbers. And I ended up hiring another APRN to help. And another therapist. I hired a therapist also to take on some of the referrals. So it definitely caused me to shift and kind of really radically make some changes of how can I help with this pandemic, because you're right, it is a pandemic, without necessarily overburning myself. So
Wow. So you basically just took the gloves off and dove in up to your elbows, right? Like I have to be hands-on with this.
yeah, it was like all hands on deck, because even then, sorry, um, even then I was working as an RN around the pandemic, and I was working in the ED, and it was crazy. The hours that we were working for all the people who were coming who were COVID positive, I would still be doing that on top. So it was literally all hands on deck at that point in time. You didn't even have time to breathe and kind of think of, okay, it was just like, this is the problem. We have to step it up.
Wow. So Jackie, what did you see, and what do you think were the causes?
Yeah, I have to agree with Latonya 100%. COVID did have such a big impact, and the fear that came with it, the unknown that she spoke of. I think that is exactly right. I know how the statistics are. We're like between 1 to 4, or 1 in 4, or 1 in 5, depending on what source you look at, of American adults do have a mental health condition. So having that 1 in 4 actually seeking help. I think there was a shift that COVID created, where people started to do some self-analysis and self-reflection because we were very isolated. We were locked down. We had nothing else to do but to sit in our own thoughts. And for some people, that became extremely scary. But some individuals realized, I can do something about it. A lot of the stigma around mental health was starting to break down, and people started to say, no, I can see a therapist. I can do some self-care. I can give myself that grace, whether it's medication or just talking to someone, going to support groups. The whole variety of care just became more spoken about, and that stigma continues to break. It's still there in some places, but we're working on it. That's part of what we're here to do and to talk about in communities. But I think, unfortunately, that need still needs a lot of help. I know that in my own personal journey in trying to find a therapist post-pandemic, I had to go to Massachusetts. I couldn't find anyone local that fit the need that I was looking for because it is a partnership. You can't just go to any provider and expect to get great care. Not to say anything bad about our providers, it just has to be that partnership that works so that you get that relationship that is definitely going to benefit you. And I have a fantastic therapist if you're watching. Girl, I love you. But I do want to say to Latonia, thank you for being brave and realizing that you could help in different ways, because we need more people like you. And I would love to hear what Siobhan has to say and how you've been navigating this and what you've seen as well.
No, thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said so far. So during COVID, I actually worked for a local community health center in their school-based department. So I worked in an elementary school providing therapy services to the students that attended that elementary school. And at the time, it was myself and one other clinician, and we had maybe about 100 to 125 students on our caseload that was already students in that school. And I think what happened with COVID, what I experienced with COVID is the referrals, like what has been said already, the referrals just skyrocketed, not only for adults, but also for children and adolescents, because they are isolated, they are disconnected from their peers, they are disconnected from their daily routine, what they have been used to. And parents also started to recognize some symptoms and some behaviors happening within their children. So they also started to seek mental health services for children. Prior to the pandemic, mental health, definitely a real thing. At the agency that I worked at, we already had clinicians at capacity, and COVID put those clinicians at an even high capacity. We did see a lot of burnout. There were clinicians jumping into full-time private practice because, trying to manage working for a federally qualified health center or community health center and doing private practice at the same time became difficult. And I was one of those. Luckily, the agency that I worked for, they said, hey, do your schedule how you need to. Modify your schedule in a way that worked for you. So I was able to see some clients throughout the day and also help my kids with homeschooling and online learning and all of those other things. And in the evening when my husband came home is when I would see my private practice clients. But it got to the point where I had to turn clients away from my private practice because I was already at capacity. So I think COVID shined a brighter light, so to speak, on mental health, but it also allowed people to be more vulnerable and more brave to be able to seek mental health services and get the help that they needed. And I went from working with kids, because it was all hands on deck, like Latanya said, to working with other populations, having to work with, college age and even the geriatric population. Even they were seeking mental health services, a population where it's like, you don't say it, you don't talk about it, you deal with it internally, nothing leaves the family, So I think COVID definitely shone the light on mental health and why it's important to even seek mental health services as well.
So all three of you are over here spitting bars, right? Like you're like you are saying things that absolutely resonate and absolutely have truth. And I'm like, I don't know because I'm not on the camera, but I sit here and I furiously take notes as you guys are saying things. And there were three words that really hit me. disconnection, isolation, and stigma, right? And it leads to the next question that I had, because according to that same KFF study, among adults who report fair or poor mental health, 50% of white adults were willing to seek healthcare and say that they received healthcare in mental health care in the past 3 years. That number drops down to 39% in Black patients and 36%, according to their study with Latino and Hispanic patients. What do you think are some of the reasons for those huge disparities?
There are numerous reasons, unfortunately, and I don't want to speak for a whole group of people, obviously, but in my experiences, I know that there is a very large distrust, especially when talking about Black community, representing my own community, um, for the medical profession in general. And that does include mental health, like all of the torture, the experimentation, all of the neglect, everything that has been done to Black bodies over time, like Tuskegee, all of these things that have happened. Like some of us didn't even get vaccinated because we didn't trust the science. So it's been a very hard struggle to try and have conversations with people in communities that don't even have interest because they completely shut down because it's like, nope, not an option. I was, told I couldn't trust these people. I've seen I can't trust these people. Having bad experiences in the medical profession, even having bad experiences in therapy. There are prejudices, biases, the stereotypes, all these things that exist because we're still human beings. Even if you have a doctor, even if you have a therapist, they're still coming in with their own baggage. And unfortunately, some of those things can seep out and then create those negative experiences. And then why would you want to go back? I know there's tons of reasons, and I don't want to go through the whole list because I actually speak on this in trainings. So I must stop there and hear what my other panelists have to share. But that definitely is that mistrust is such a big issue for stigma.
I'm gonna piggyback on what Jacqueline is saying also too. I think lack of representation. There's not enough providers of color where people who identify with this, obviously, with our race, feel comfortable seeking help. You're like a unicorn. I've never seen a Black nurse practitioner, a full sleeve, nails. What? Like it's different when you can find someone that makes you feel like you can connect. Um, Not that we're not out there, it's just not enough. So, and then the ones that are out there, we're full. So it's not much that we can do. So I definitely would say, especially in my profession, there really aren't a lot of people of color, Hispanic, Black, whatever, of nurse practitioner or even doctors hire. I actually see a lot more people of color as far as in social work. But when you start to get more as medication management, which is severely a big trust, a lot of distrust of you want me to convince you to take something. Like I remember one time, funny story, but I'll be very quick. My dad, he had called me and it was about the vaccine. And my dad is Jamaican. So he called me and he was like, Tanya, don't take it. I was like, why? What are you talking about? He's like, listen, you can't take that. Why? He was like, because it's going to put a microchip in your. Where are you getting this from? And I just think at the end of the day, like, as even though it's funny, even him knowing what I do for a living, it still didn't necessarily quell down the mistrust. And not only just the mistrust, but just the fear of the unknown. So I definitely think lack of representation is huge, which could probably contribute to those numbers.
And I'm sitting in the background giggling because I can relate, right? I can relate to having these conversations whether it's about something financial, whether it's about something, medical, whether about something social, and the predisposition to disbelieve the powers that be when something is put forth, even if it's for our benefit, right? So I can absolutely relate to it. And the idea that there is a lack of representation, right? And people who are involved with the chamber and have listened to some of these conversations have heard me say before that in order to be a thing, you have to see a thing or conceive a thing, right? You have to see it in practice. You have to see somebody doing it and go, oh, if they can do it, I can do it too. Or you got to look at the landscape as it exists and goes, there's a gap here, and I think I have the skills and abilities to fill that gap. And I think that applies to people going to seek help, but it applies to people who find themselves looking for a profession, right? A lot of people of color may go into social work because they go, oh, well, my aunt's a social worker, or I met this social worker who happened to be, the same race, ethnicity, national origin, religious origin that I am. So I could see me working in that slot. But how many kids come across a Black APRN? Very few, right? Unless they've had the opportunity to have somebody enter their life and have that impact. But that's why these conversations are important, because you get to showcase who you are and how you contribute, and also how you came to where you are, and be an inspiration for other people. So just wanted to share that, and thank you for what you do. But one of the major things that I heard just now, and it was also a point for conversation, is that mistrust factor, right? You look at the Tuskegee experiments. For those of you who aren't familiar, there was a situation roughly 100 years ago where the U.S. government was supposed to be giving vaccines to people, and instead were injecting them with syphilis, right? It's Googleable. It's a real thing that happened in U.S. history. Or you have a situation where the tools that are used in gynecological exams were created through rough experiments with slaves without anesthetic or medication, right? Like, these are things that really happened to the people of these communities, and are passed down and created this extensive distrust that exists, right? So it's not just anecdotal or unfounded fear. It's based in historical events and historical traumas that get passed down. So the question I have, and not that we'll find a specific answer, but how do we combat that?
Well, one of the things, Chris, that I thought of just now is, as I was listening to you and Latanya, is that generational trauma, right? We know that generational trauma is a real thing, and we have seen it through what you just described in the treatment of Black and Brown people. So we need to take into consideration that because of this generational trauma, there is a core belief system that's going to be built in Black and Brown people that says, I can't trust, or it's hard for me to trust going in and speaking to a therapist and being open and being honest. And that's going to contribute to them not seeking care. I can speak in terms from working with children and adolescents. There is even some fear-based thoughts and fear-based beliefs, even in children, in regards to speaking up and speaking out, because they believe a lot of times that there's going to be some form of retaliation, or something bad is going to happen if they share, if they speak, if they say I'm sad, or if they say I'm depressed or hurt or this. There's this belief that is developed, saying that they can't say anything about these things because I'm going to be taken away from my parents, or my parents are going to go to jail, and right, and all of these other belief systems that's incorporated in that. So I think, one, having conversations like this to say, hey, like, we understand that mental health is real, from a child as young as 5 years old to someone who's 80, like my oldest client right now, I believe she's 79, right? So we know that this is a real thing, and we know that it's passed through generations. So being sensitive to that, breaking the mental health stigma by having these conversations, and also educating. It's going to be extremely important that we educate our young people that mental health doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. You weren't, you're not bad or anything like that because you're having these experiences, but you're human, and that you're flesh, and that we as humans, we go through life and we experience highs and we experience lows, and sometimes it's going to be difficult for us to experience the lows, and we might need a coach, or we might need a therapist, or we might need a counselor, or we might need a pastor, right, or a deacon, or a priest or something like that, to walk along with you on the journey to help you manage those highs and those lows in a way that's going to be effective and beneficial for your mental health.
So that's huge, right? Like the idea that you might need a counselor or a coach or a pastor. And I think about like my own experiences with mental health and my own experiences with therapy, because much like you described, Siobhan, I'm the person that people would call for advice. And that's how I almost went down that path and became a clinical psychologist. My dad was like, listen, you have people calling here at 3 o'clock in the morning, you should get paid for it. Right? You helping these people sort out their lives and sort out their problems, you should get paid for it. You should probably go to school for psychology. And that was the path that I chose initially. And when I finally, at some point decided to say, hey, I need to sit down with somebody and sort out some of the things that I'm going through, it was the thought process that you described. No matter how talented of a surgeon you are, you're going to have a hard time cutting out your own cancer. Right? It is important to have somebody on the sideline to pulse check things too, right? Like you may be doing something because that's what your family or community of origin has taught you. And my siblings and I often say, like, you don't know something's traumatic until you have something else to compare it to. Right. So you just grow up going through a thing or handling a situation in a way that feels natural and reflexive to you, without having that independent, unbiased voice going, well, that's probably not the best way to handle that, and here's why. So almost like in the same way that you need to take your car in for a recalibration, right, or oil change or something along those lines, or rotate the tire. It's the same thing for your mental health.
I think, Chris, a lot of times what I've experienced from my clients that do come in reluctantly to get treatment, even if it's just therapy, not even medication management, they all do the same thing, especially from a cultural lens. They always separate the mind from the body. They don't necessarily see that their mind itself needs to be nourished. It needs to be taken care of. It's no different than you got a diagnosis from your provider that says you have diabetes. They will change their diet. They will start exercising. They will take that metformin. They will take their Ozempic. But the moment I'll be like, you look kind of weary, you look kind of stressed and tired. Oh, no, that's life. I think sometimes a lot of patients, and you know what, even myself, I'll throw myself in there. I think sometimes we're just so used to the run of life, and we bear and grin it, and don't necessarily know that at times you're burning both ends of the stick. And what ends up happening, and I don't know if Siobhan sees this, a lot of times we get them not when it's too late, when a lot of damage has been done. It's not like, because the education, they don't know the early symptoms. A lot of times, especially with mental health, many people of color suffer in silence. It's not even just the fact of something bad happened to them, or if they were traumatized or sexually abused, but it's a faux pas to actually say, hey, I'm not well today. I need a mental health day. I need to figure some things out. It's almost kind of looks as complaining, as opposed to, is there anything else behind that? So I definitely think one of the biggest things that I have to do a lot of what is that? It's a lot of challenging cognitive beliefs about what mental health is, and personalize it what your mental health is. Like it's not the same for everyone. And the way that people cope, they feel like that's the way, that's just how I handle it. Again, I'll use myself as an example. I had a long history of trauma as a kid, but also as my young adult. And I didn't realize it until, I think, because there's always a running joke that I have multiple jobs, but I didn't realize that that was my way of coping. Anytime I was going through something or was depressed or was really struggling, I would get another job. I would just literally just get another job. I would apply for another job, not because my money wasn't right. It just, I is a great distraction. I don't have to deal with my own issues. At one point, my husband sat me down. He was like, "You realize you got 6 jobs right now? When are you going to see your kids?" And I'm like, "Wait, what? You don't even realize that you just keep going and going." And I think a lot of times, especially people of color, they're so used to the struggle, and they're used to just making it and going. And I think it's time for us to tap them out and be like, "No, that's not how this is anymore. It's time to take care of every part of you, because you cannot separate the mind from the body."
Bars, once again, bars, right? Like, so as you're saying these things, it's bringing me back to things I've heard my entire life, right? Where, oh, first off, the idea of retaliation and that fear of retaliation. Oh, you don't put your business in the street. You don't want those people showing up at our door and potentially causing problems for the family. And, or the idea of taking care of the whole being, right? Where, using a car example again, like, yeah, it's great that you're taking care of the outside of the car. You're taking it to get washed, you're getting it detailed. What about the engine? What about the steering wheel? What about the driver? Right? Like, all these things have to work in conjunction to get the machine to move. Right? To get the machine to move. So I think that's a very important part of it all. And the resistance because of those stigmas, and that separation of the body and mind, and treating them as very different things. Like, the idea of experiencing mental fatigue and experiencing stress and going, oh well, that's just part of life, or experiencing trauma and just brushing it off and self-soothing through, all manners of ways that we self-soothe and self-medicate, right? Like, you have people who will tell you, oh, I'm not going to take these pills that they're giving me, but they're going to find other substances to soothe themselves. So one of the other questions that I had as I think about these things, and these specific impediments, that what are some of the things that you're seeing that are unique to, and of course we're not a monolith, and different people go through different things, but there are going to be some general similarities, right? What are some of the things that you're seeing that are unique to these populations of color and these patients of color versus some of your other patients? Anybody?
Well, I'm thinking. Up until January 1st of this year, I worked in community health centers. So like UCFS in Norwich, and then I worked for a community health center in New Britain. And the population that I worked with, again, primarily children and adolescents. Environment is one of the big things. Their culture. I worked with a lot of Hispanic and Black and brown kids, and in the homes, what we saw was, absent. At least one parent was or is absent. We have moms who are overworked, working multiple jobs to be able to provide for children day in and day out, and living in survivor mode, functioning in high stress, living with functional depression and these things, functional anxiety, because they're working every day to provide. but the kids in the home is being affected and neglected because they're trying to keep a roof over the kids' heads, right? So from a child and adolescent standpoint, we're seeing a lot of emotion dysregulation in the academic setting, especially. We have kids coming in, where, yeah, their basic needs might be met, but they don't know how to express that they're stressed or, they're depressed or that they're anxious. And they just see a mom or parents who are just working every day and pushing through just because the bills have to be paid. And then on the flip side of that, now transitioning into private practice, I'm working with families who, I don't want to use the word intact, but I'm working with families where the parents, I will say the parents are more engaged and involved in the therapeutic process. So the success outcomes are actually higher than when I was working in community mental health, right? So from this side of things now, I'm seeing kids being able to come in, they're able to learn the strategies, they're able to learn that mental health is okay. They're able to learn, coping strategies to deal with anger outbursts, depression, anxiety, and then they're able to be successfully discharged. So I feel like there's a difference depending on what the culture is and the community and the environment, at least for kids where they're living in, which direction that can go in, Chris.
So the level of supports make a difference in
Yeah.
in the kids. And Jackie, you had something to share?
Yeah, I was pausing because you said patients. I can't speak to patients. I can speak to learners.
Oh.
So I speak with a lot of individuals that are seeking to dive into self-care, for example. That's a big topic that comes up all the time, where it seems like people have just not been doing that. They see it as a reward, and that's it. And that's a very common thread in our communities that I see happening, because we always have to do better, be better, jump higher, sing louder, be on point, be professional. All times the bar is extremely high. And in order to achieve that, we are always hustling, grinding, going. And once we've achieved something, then we can take a little break. We forget that self-care is also fuel. We forget that we need to prepare for the day and make sure that we are taking care of ourselves so we can be the best. But instead, we're going to the point of burnout, and then maybe we'll seek something. And so that's something I see that's very, very common, where we set that bar way too high. We have these society's perceptions of how we're supposed to be, and creating that self that might be unobtainable for some of us because we're not taking the time to regroup and take care of ourselves in a whole health way. I'm echoing some of what we already talked about that split between mental and physical health and how it's seen as two completely separate things. So I'm seeing a lot of people trying to find a way to integrate it, trying to find a way for it to make sense so that they can actually build strategies and plans and have the tools so that they can give back to themselves.
So giving back to yourself is a great perspective, right? I often say you can't feed the world with an empty spoon. Like, you've got to dip back into it. And I don't say that because I'm some brilliant dude. I say because, like, I've lived it and I've had to learn it. Like, just before the pandemic, I don't think I had taken a vacation in 10 years. And it took my ex-wife and my siblings and my kids to go, yo, stop. Take a minute, right? Like, you're busy doing all these things and stuff for other people, but what are you doing for yourself? Because all this stuff is great, but if you're not taking care of yourself and you're not around for us in the long term, then it amounts to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking from that lens, like, how do we get people to focus on some of the preventative measures, right? Like, before the breakdown happens, before the full collapse. Like, what are some of the things we can get people to do to change their framing for it? And also, what are some of the steps people can do, like small things they can do to take care of themselves?
Yeah, I can tell you what worked personally for me. I started reading an author, her name is Tricia Hersey, She is the founder of what's called the NAP Ministry. If you have not heard about her, I highly encourage you to check her out because she said one line that opened up my eyes to what I need to do for my own self-care, and that is rest is part of the strategic plan. Because I'm a hustle grind kind of girl. That's how I was raised. I had to be better than anybody. I had to be straight A student, honor roll, dean's list, all that 9 yards. And I realized, just like you were saying, Chris, I didn't take vacation for a very long time. I'm doing all this and I'm not even enjoying the life I'm building. But if I can reframe my mind and think about the strategy and the goals that I have set for myself, I have to build rest into that plan and make it part of it, not as a reward, but part of the plan because it's necessary. And I actually have at my desk as a reminder, shameless plug, her rest deck. And it's literally just cards, 50 different cards that have advice for me every single day and give me little exercises of what I need to do. So I have to set aside at least 5 minutes, read a card, ground myself, give myself that grace. And it's just, just all you need sometimes is just 5 minutes just for you. And every single person deserves that.
And the way you describe it, right? And I'll ask a question. Do you actually set an alarm for this? Like, is it something that you built into your calendar in that way?
Sometimes I have to. If I have a lot of trainings, if I have a lot of meetings, I have to block off on my Outlook calendar and literally just say break so that I get that reminder. Because if I don't, it's going to be a long day.
But that's a great tip, right? Because if your brain works in that way where you're constantly in grind, constantly in I gotta go, I gotta do, I gotta be adding value, right, in some way to earn the rest. If you build in that rest period in the same way that you schedule every other meeting in your life, right?
Mhm.
And I do the same thing. That's why I ask. Like I actually have it on my calendar that meditate, take 5 minutes, right? And I build in things in that way so that when that pop-up happens, I am mindful and I remember to get it done. And it's very much like going to the gym, or which I also have to put back on the calendar, but that's another story. But like going to the gym, or stopping to have a meal. It's all additional steps you take to maintain the machine, to keep it running properly.
Yep. And also calling a friend, reading a book. Like you can book all this stuff and make it just as important as everything else in your life. And the more you do that, it becomes more natural. But it does take practice because I think a lot of us have come from this culture that all of that's extra.
Right.
We got to get the work done first. So we got to stop thinking about that as off to the side. We got to bring it back into our day to day and see the real value because, in my opinion, we got one shot at this life. So let's enjoy it.
Oh, absolutely. Latanya, Siobhan, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, a couple of things come to mind. First thing is, well, what's your compass, right? Like when we get up, when we wake up every morning, what's your compass of how you're going to navigate the day, and how do you get your mind set on being able to accomplish the things of the day? Where does your strength come from? Who is your support system? And that's one of the things when working with families, even though, again, working with children and adolescents, one of the main questions I ask is, who is your support system? Right? Who is that person or those people that you can call, when you are having a moment, when you need support, when you need strength, right? And being able to utilize them in a way that's going to be healthy and effective and to help you, get through your day to day. And then in regards to rest, when working with adults, I actually try to encourage at least, at minimum, if possible, one long weekend a month, or at least outside of just the holidays. So I'm talking about outside of when you have a random, Monday off or something like that, right? But how can you build in at least one long weekend, a day your children are in school, where you have that time where you can reflect, where you can take some time to read or just rest, or just rest, right? The way our bodies were designed and created, there are indicators that it gives us when something is not right. So if we're getting multiple headaches or stomach pain or chest pain or leg pain, right? Our body is designed and created in a way to say like, hey, something's not right with me. I need help. I need to go see a doctor from the physical standpoint. So from the mental health standpoint, when you're waking up and you don't feel like going to work, you don't feel like getting out of bed, you don't feel like doing the things that you normally do, that's a sign and an indicator that it's time to take a day of rest. I love that, Jackie, that take a day of rest, right? Have your body do what it needs to do to rejuvenate and get you back to where it is that you would like to be.
I agree. I'll add on, piggybacking on everyone's conversation. One of the things that I've observed, maybe outside of everything that you talked about, was patients, I'm not patients, just people in general, feeling that they actually deserve it. I've had patients, I'll talk to them and be like, what do you mean you shouldn't take a vacation? What do you mean you are not going to take 4 hours off of work today? Isn't that what you deserve? You work hard, you take care of your kids, you're staying out of trouble, you're not in the streets, you're doing what you're doing. And a lot of them, it comes back about how they feel about themselves. They really have very poor views of themselves, and they just feel like they're just here for a purpose, and that's it. They don't see themselves out of work, see themselves out of their roles, and not necessarily focusing on their needs and what they want out of life, which makes it very difficult for them to do some of the homework that I'm sure Siobhan or myself, or even you, Jacqueline, we would give them. We would give them homework assignments, and 9 times out of 10, it come back not done. And because they're not able to conceptualize what rest is, they don't think they deserve it. They don't think it's a situation where if I rest, I'm going to pay for it later. And I think that's part of the whole mental health struggle is so layered. It's not just the fact that, okay, I'm coming to you and I'm depressed. A lot of people just are really struggling to just enjoy life and understanding what happiness for them are. So when I tell someone to rest or to do something that's self-care, it immediately turns into a reward system. Okay, so I'm gonna get my nails and toes done. All right, that's what I'm gonna do. No, that's maintenance. That's maintenance. Like that's like rewarding yourself because you brushed your teeth and washed yourself today. Like you want your hair to look good. You want your nails to look good. You want to be presentable. You want to put a little bit of mascara on. Like those are things that you do that are like everyday tasks. What are you doing for yourself that you feel I deserve this? I think once they can get past that cognitive distortion, then rest becomes it becomes obtainable, and not only obtainable, they can sustain it. They're not just doing it here and there. They're making it a part of the routine. You won't even need an alarm clock because it feels too good. And you're going to be like, listen, this is something that I got to do. I'm starting to see, oh, yeah, I forgot. I got caught up in the work week. Yeah, my phone is on do not disturb for about 2-3 hours. People who know where I need to be or where I'm at, they know it. But the world is not going to end if I take some time for me. So I think from my perspective, it's a little bit different. But when I talk to a lot of my patients, they don't really think they deserve.
So you said something that really like slapped me, right? Like so the idea of deserve and the idea of bandwidth, right? It wasn't exactly how you framed it, but like
Mhm.
it hit me as bandwidth, right? And I remember, gosh, it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago at this point, and my older sister called me out of the blue. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and she just goes, "Hey, how are you?" And I'm like, "I'm good. How are you?" Typical conversation. And she goes, "No, how are you?" And I stopped. I looked at the phone. I said, "I'm good. Why are you being weird? How are you doing?" And then she said for a third time, "No, Chris, how are you?" And mind you, there was nothing that preceded this call that would indicate that I was going through anything, right? I was just working and doing what I normally do. And on that third ask, I started bawling. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I have this to do and I have that to do. And I have so many things. And she says, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna cancel all the meetings you have for the rest of the week, and you're gonna come home to Brooklyn and you're not gonna do anything. I'm like, I can't do that. I got a Minority Business Network meeting tomorrow morning at 9:00. She says, you know what? They'll take care of it. I said, and I have these clients to meet with, and they'll sort it out. And I called Chris Conway and I called Kate and I said, listen, I had some stuff come up. I won't be able to host a meeting tomorrow. And they said, don't worry, we got you. And they figured it out. Right. And then all my clients I had to meet with, they had to figure it out. And I went home and I didn't tell anybody I was going home. I literally went home to New York and I spent 4 days hiding out in an extra room at my mom's house, not taking any business calls. The only calls I took were calls from my kids. And I had to recalibrate. And part of it was that thing that I built into my own head and that had been built into my head over years of being a Black man and a Caribbean man and a businessman, right? I got to do the thing. I got to do the work. I got to provide the value. I got to support these people because these people don't have any other support besides me. And my sister also said to me, when you drop dead from the stress and the overwork and the overextension of your bandwidth, your job will be posted before your obituary. And so when you guys are sharing this perspective, it's making me go, how do we get people to appreciate that, once again, rest is not a reward, it's a requirement. And to also be respectful of their own bandwidth, their own capacity.
Unfortunately, I don't think there is one answer to that.
Yeah.
It's very personal. It's personal to everybody. Everyone's going to be different. I wish I had a Band-Aid I could put on this. I wish I could just give someone the secret sauce and we can all just accept that we deserve grace and we deserve to be good to ourselves. I think it comes down to education and practice and finding what works for you. And I know for me, it helps to have that representation and seeing someone do it right. That's why Tricia Hersey echoed so well for me, because she shared her story of how she got to a point of going, and realizing this is not helping. I need to take a step back and I need to rest. And she found that strength and made that step and made those changes. And I was like, okay, she could do it. I can figure it out. I can do better for myself. I can give back to myself. So sometimes you just need that inspiration and having that support. I know, Siobhan, you talked about asking that first question about who's your support. I think that's so important because we talk about self-care, we talk about giving yourself grace. You do need to lean on other people, just like you said, Chris, in your story that, okay, you need to take time off, they'll take care of it. You had Kate, you had Chris Conway to take care of things for you. That's your support. That allowed you to take a rest and not worry about it. So there's lots of ways to get at it.
One of the things I like what you said about education there, and one thing I like about a lot of the elementary schools or the school districts in Connecticut I'm learning is there is a social emotional piece that is being incorporated into their day-to-day in the classroom. So some of the districts do have individuals going in to talk about mental health, to teach meditation and to teach calming strategies and teach emotion regulation and things like that. So, I think if we can have more of that, starting with our students, that they'll be able to bring some of those things home, right? They'll be able to go home and have discussions and conversations about mental health and how these strategies can help them both inside and outside of the classroom. And hopefully that can trickle down to the parents also to recognize and realize, okay, that it's okay for them to seek help or to do some breathing exercises or incorporate meditation, or, you know, if they're spiritual or religious, you know, reading the Bible or Quran or whatever, you know, whatever their affiliation is, to help them kind of like set that compass and take that time to rest. I would love to see that continue into some high school students. I would love to see, you know, high schoolers be able to get some classes on mental health, even if it's just 1 year. And I think health classes do touch on it, but I think it would be really good for our students to really start to become educated on mental health, some of the signs and symptoms and behaviors, of, you know, struggling, and what that looks like. So when they are in a place of need, they're able to reach out and say that that's what it is that they need, and they need help with some mental health stuff.
So, Siobhan, you asked the question as who is your support system? And Jackie, you mentioned like the importance of calling a friend. One of the things that I've seen a lot with regards to mental health, and some of the triggers for it, are isolation, right? That feeling that you don't have somebody to call, or you don't have somebody who supports you, or that no one will understand, whether it's real or perceived, right? What are some well, firstly, are you seeing this in your practices and your day-to-day work? And also, what are some of the tips that you're giving people to combat it if you are seeing it?
Yeah, I definitely do see that quite often, especially since the pandemic. A lot of us were literally isolated, and then, you know, we literally lost people. We lost lots of loved ones. And when you're sitting in that isolation, that loneliness, and then sometimes that grief, because maybe you did have somebody at some point, and now you're alone. Um, Especially in older generations, you see this a lot. It's an epidemic of loneliness that we're facing, and you mentioned, Chris, about nobody will understand. There's that self doubt of like, I'm not even going to bother to try and find somebody because no one's going to get it anyway. And unfortunately, that is a big barrier to try and reach out to someone to say, no, you do matter. Um, what you're feeling is valid, and there are people and supports and resources available to you. I know on MHC's website, we have a whole directory of resources that are available for people to check out depending on your different communities, your interests, and the like. And I actually had a good friend of mine reach out to me. It was actually right after Sonia Massey was killed, and she was checking in on all her Black females in the world because she felt that here we go again. And that things like that do spark that feeling of no one's going to understand this, and you do kind of retreat into yourself. And she said, and I quote verbatim, "You are seen and appreciated in all the chaos you are expected to navigate." And just hearing that from her, and she lives in a different state, um, I felt connected again. I felt like I do have someone I can turn to and talk to. And so just educating people that there are resources, making sure that they feel valued and seen and heard and appreciated can go such a long way. But we have to have more of these dialogues and more of these conversations so that we are reaching people, because sometimes they might not take that step out. We have to step in and help.
So reaching out and looking for the people we haven't seen in a little while, the people who we've lost contact with, the people who might be going through something and suffering in silence, right? I think that's absolutely important. I talk about the idea of like notes and reminders in my phone, and pop-up reminders and alarms. And one of my alarms is every Friday at 10 a.m. I say send a note of gratitude, whether it's a text message, whether it's an email, whatever. I shoot a quick text message to say to someone, "Hey mom, thank you for not killing me in my sleep. I know you were tempted. Hey siblings, thank you for the support. You know, hey Conway, good looking out on that thing that we worked on, last week, the golf outing, whatever." Like any number of things. And anybody, even my kids, like I'll just send them, "Hey, was thinking about you. while you're at mom's house, how's the day going? Or, I appreciate that you did ABCD, just something to get the conversation started. Right. Um, but when I think about, like, from an individual standpoint, what things can we be doing to build community for ourselves so that we have those support systems if we don't intrinsically have them?
I mean, I feel this conversation is a great first step. Having just avenues and opportunities to have a dialogue, to create solutions together, to pose the questions you're posing, Chris, and just say, well, what do we think? How can we do this? And having a community and seeing that, there's 20 participants right now watching, and then I know it's being streamed as well, encouraging people to connect in different ways and just have the dialogue. It's a great way to create community and create solutions that make sense for us. Because what might work for me might just, Siobhan's like, nope. Antonia's like, nope. Like we're all different, but we come together as a community and we can share those stories and ideas. That's how you build it. You just have to start somewhere. You have to open up the conversation.
I think that's absolutely true. On top, obviously, this is a great platform, and thank you so much, Chris, for even thinking of me to be a part of this. But I think it's also just changing anyone who's involved in this field, everyone that's on this panel now. We have to realize outside of doing a duty to our patients, clients, whoever that we're serving, we have to kind of do a little bit more. We have to kind of pioneer and advocate for our profession and just for mental health in general. I think when I first started, or my first experience of mental health it was pretty dark. And the reason why I would say dark, it's like, I remember one time I went somewhere with I don't know, I think it was a family member, and it was actually I didn't even realize it was a therapy appointment. And the therapy appointment was in a basement and it was no windows. It was very odd. And I just kind of felt like that kind of is how mental health is treated, like a stepchild. Like we know you exist, but you're over here. And the only time it really gets brought up is when something bad happens, hence school shootings, a lot of different things that are happening. And that's when all of a sudden it's a problem. Because that's why I don't read comments. You'll see the comments, oh my God, how did this like mental health failed him. Well, we don't know the story. How do we know that that person actually was in treatment or maybe was not adherent? We don't know. I think if we can continue to really uplift and kind of transform what our community looks like, I think we'll get a lot more support. This platform is amazing, but imagine if this platform was going on all the time. Maybe not every day, but more, maybe once a month or twice a month. I think it's very important to kind of push it more in the forefront as opposed to negative experiences being the highlight of what mental health is. We don't want mental health to be seen as a crisis all the time. We're not always in crisis. There's a difference between, mental health and then there's mental health disorders. Like there's a difference. And I think the society or our community is very confused about the two. It's a lot of negative connotation to it. So, I think just being able to transform and take control of the narrative of what we do, and show the good outside of the bad and the ugly, I think that's very important as well.
So, like, as you just broke that down, I'm thinking, once again, that separation of physical and mental. Like a physical problem, you go, oh, I cut my hand, I probably need a stitch, right? Or, I know that heart disease is a thing, so I do cardio to prevent heart disease, right? From a physical standpoint. What steps can people take to make sure that they're, yeah, and we talked a bit about rest, right? And we talked a bit about community supports, but like what other steps can people take to make sure that they're maintaining a level of mental health so we avoid those crisis situations? And how does someone know that they're in crisis, right? Because I go back to that thing I said kind of early on. You don't know that you have trauma until you have something to compare it to. Because if everybody in your neighborhood is going through very similar traumas, it's just life.
I think, this is my standpoint about it. We're living in a very digital technology type of world right now. So a lot of clients, patients, individuals, whoever, regardless if you're Black or brown or white, it doesn't matter. A lot of times they're doing a lot of research themselves. They are looking for answers. They're going on TikTok. They're on Reddit. They're on a lot of those social media platforms just to find answers. And, as quick as I can be able to, if I type in borderline personality disorder, you'll see over 100,000 TikTok videos for that, but you don't really see a lot of resources from a clinical and evidence-based practice on social media that's represented as well. And let's be clear, I will acknowledge my own biasness. I don't want to say cutthroat, but I would be very ignorant. I'm gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. If I had way back and then, if I had a patient be like, well, I think I have ADHD, and I'm like, okay, well, why do you think you have ADHD? Well, on TikTok. So as soon as the conversation starts like that, I would like shut down. I'll be like, yeah, we're not doing that today. We're not doing that today. We're gonna talk. We're gonna go. Let me go pull out the good old DSM Bible, and we're gonna go over this. And I cannot do that because at the end of the day, people are searching. People are looking for answers. They're acknowledging that something doesn't feel right, not necessarily that they have a problem, but they're struggling. And if they don't have access, they're going to find it. And a lot of times there's a lot of misrepresentation and misinformation out there. So I think we need to have that forceful presentation through either social media or social avenues. So we can not say that, no, you can't depend on those people's experiences, but we also have these other resources that you can go to that can kind of give you, because unfortunately, not everybody can afford the healthcare. Not everybody has access to it, even though we're supposed to, the Health Parity Act will try to give access to all, but it's still difficult. It's still difficult for a lot of people. So if that's the way to reach people, then I think for us, that's something that we should be maybe more aggressive in, if that's a way to kind of say.
Yeah. No, I think I follow what you're saying. Because I think about the idea of social media and the input of social media and like how social media has, dropped certain terms into the lexicon. Like, as you were talking about, like, oh, I saw it on TikTok, so yeah, I think I have ADHD. And my mind immediately went to the word narcissist, right? Like where everybody is a narcissist and everybody displays narcissistic tendencies. And it versus displaying narcissistic tendencies, everybody is a narcissist and they're clinical and they have a mental illness, because it is part of the lexicon now, right? It's part of the vocabulary we use. How does somebody sift through all of that? Like as a teenage, not even just teenagers, adults, right? Like we tend to believe the things that we hear from people that we trust, and we don't generally verify, right? There's not a lot of stuff that comes from a clinical standpoint, or we don't seek out stuff from a clinical standpoint because we trust that person, we trust what they say. How does somebody navigate all of that stuff?
The person or the professional?
Ooh, both. Both.
Well, from my part, I don't invalidate their experience. I'm not gonna lie. I had to grow. Sometimes I'd be like, yeah, that's not it. Like, that's not what you're talking. Like, no, you're not most people who are narcissists are not coming to therapy. Like this is not what we're doing here. And they're not diagnosing themselves either. Like I tried to tell one person, he told me he was a sociopath. I said, you can't, or a psychopath. I said, you can't diagnose yourself as a psychopath. It's impossible. You cannot do it. However, I didn't say it in that way. It was more of a conversation, like what makes you feel that you're that way, as opposed to invalidating their experience. That's the way to kind of let me in the door. If you let me in the door, now we can start having not necessarily challenging, but really kind of thoughtful, I call them courageous conversations. Courageous conversations about what they're feeling as opposed to what could actually be presenting, because that's different. It's not always the same. And I think from a professional standpoint, we have to have that openness to be able to do that without invalidating. Because remember, the moment you invalidate, you lose trust. That's it. The moment they feel, even if it's you're giving an opposing opinion, the moment they feel that you look at them a certain way, that's when the trust already starts to seep in. And then now you lose them.
Wow. And because I want to talk about that trust thing, the thing you just said about trust, but I want to address the other part of the question, which was how do patients navigate this? Like they're being confronted with all sorts of information on mental health, and all sorts of misinformation on mental health. How they navigate the real from the hype, really.
But one of the first things I think it's important to do when working with clients is that psychoeducation piece. Let's go over, what this diagnosis is, what this diagnosis means, what it looks like. Starting off with some assessment so we can get a baseline, so we can really kind of see like where you are exactly, and then reviewing those assessments with the client. So whether you are assessing them for depression or anxiety or ADHD or addiction or what have you. There's so many different assessments and tools out there that as a clinician, as a therapist, we can use to really help the client understand where they are. And also, yes, everything you see on social media, everything you read, everything you see is not going to be true, but let's have an open dialogue about what your questions are. What are your concerns, right? Latanya mentioned the DSM. What does the DSM say for the criteria, right? The people who sit in a room and look over all of the criteria and make the decisions on, what a diagnosis is, how it should be treated, what to look for. Let's go to a source, and let's go to a trusted source, so to speak, so we can really help you to understand what these diagnoses are and how we're going to work together to help you navigate it. And then also being honest. A lot of times when we go to our doctor's office, they give us that questionnaire to fill out. Let's be honest, right? Let's be honest on the questionnaire. So your primary care physician or your family medicine doctor, whoever, can have an open conversation with you about, where you are, what these assessments say, what they reveal, and how you can really be able to get the help that you need. Chris, I wanted to touch on something you said earlier from an individual standpoint, what it is that we can do. I think that we have to be honest with ourselves about, about health, and also welcome it in our homes. We have to be an example in our homes of what good mental health looks like, right? So if my children see mom working 5 days a week, 6 days a week, mom is not taking time for herself, or dad is working 7 days a week and dad is not taking time for himself, dad is not, we're not enjoying our hobbies, we're not doing things as a family, we're not taking care of ourselves, our kids are going to get that message. Our loved ones, our moms, our dads, our aunties and uncles, our siblings, they're going to get the message that we're not taking care of ourselves. So how about we start with recognizing, okay, I need a day of rest, or something is not go right with me. I'm a little off. I need a break. I need a moment. And then being open and honest about that. You know what? Mommy needs a mental health day. Mom is going to be gone. Mom is going to the mall. Mom is going shopping, whatever. Right? Or mom and dad, we're going out for the day. We're going on a date. We're going to a game. We're going to do something, right? Because I think if we can start the conversation at home, with the ones that look up to us and the ones that are trusting us to parent them and lead them and guide them, that they'll see that mental health, this mental health stigma, it doesn't have to be a stigma. It can be acknowledged, and then practices can be put into place to help them navigate it as they get older.
You know, I immediately thought of that saying, like, children don't do what you say, they do what you do. Right. And so, you know, you can be like, oh yeah, mental health is important, but daddy, you don't take care of yourself. Daddy, you don't take breaks. Daddy, like I can picture my daughters in my face calling me out for it too, because they call me out a lot. Right. So as a parent, what steps can you take to model these kinds of behaviors for your kids? Like, what do you think are, yeah, and it doesn't have to be the end all be all, but just a step along the path. Like, what can you do?
So, for example, if I see, one of my kids are, triggered, upset, angry, or whatever, I'm like, whoa, what's going on right now? What's happening? What's happening right now? What are you feeling right now? Or if I'm annoyed or frustrated or having a moment, you know what, guys, mommy needs a break. Mommy's taking a time out. And that's what I do. One of the other things in my home, we call it quiet time. Everyone go find your space. You can go to your room, the living room, family room. You can go wherever you would like to go. But for the next hour, we're going to sit and we're going to have some downtime and we're going to have some quiet. The TV's not on. You're not on your tablet. You're not on a Xbox. You're not on anything like that. But you're going to go to your room and you're going to have some downtime, some quiet time, some time of reflection, journaling. You can read something along those lines to help you have that moment, to have that space, have that break. And also saying it, I'm not okay today. I'm not okay. I had a long day. I had a tiring day. I had a rough day. Whatever that is. Mom needs a minute, whatever. I think starting the conversation, being open and honest upfront about it is going to be the way to go. I encourage journaling a lot, especially between parent and child, because sometimes it's very hard for a child to come and say, mommy, I don't know what's wrong. I just know I have this feeling, right? Talking about going back to the isolation that we talked about a little while ago. You know what? Write it down. Write it in a journal. Give it to mom. Give it to dad. Let them read it. And then I always tell the parent, give 24 hours before responding. Because if you respond right away, you're probably going to respond from a place of high emotion. But if your child is coming to you and sharing with you that something is up with them, respond, validate. Do you need a therapist? Do you need, a day out? Do you need to take a break? What is it that you need? But I think that self-care piece goes back to it. I think it goes back to the self-care of, recognizing when your body is sending you the signals that something isn't right, something is off. I may need to talk to someone. I might need to go spend 4 days, on a beach, on a beautiful island, somewhere.
Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it starts with that, learning meditation, Calvin Young, I'm not sure if you guys know who he is, but, in Hartford, he does sound healing with like the salt bowls and all of that sort of stuff, right? Putting yourself in environments where if you don't necessarily want to engage with someone, that you're in a place that's peaceful, that's calm, that can help you, feel centered. And there's so many other things. Mindfulness, there's DBT, there's so many strategies and interventions out there that can be used.
So there's a ton of strategies. There's so many ways to take that first step along that path. But sharing what you just shared gave us some solid and tangible examples. So I appreciate that, Siobhan. Thank you. Yeah, I want to be respectful of time. Kate, it doesn't look like we had any questions come up in the chat or in the Q&A.
No, we had a few comments pop up, but it looks like you guys have covered a lot of great information.
And really, I like, this is a conversation I could have for another 2 hours, but I want to be respectful of time. With that in mind, were there any points or any
There's-
thoughts you would like to
There's
leave?
one question. Someone said, can you please share again the name of the gentleman who does sound healing? Oh, you put it in there, Kelvin.
Awesome. So thank you for covering that. So panelists, any final thoughts that you want to leave the viewing public with?
I just want to tell everyone that you matter, that you are a valuable person, and I'm so glad that you joined us today. Make sure you keep taking care of yourself, educating yourself, give yourself that grace. You deserve it. You don't need to earn it.
Latanya, Siobhan, anything else?
I just want to again thank able to speak about something that's very passionate, very dear to my heart. For those that were able to tune in again, you know, if you didn't hear anything from me, you can't separate the mind from the body. Them two has to work together. And as much as we do a lot of things to keep our temple, this is also needs to be protected. And not only protected, it needs to be fed, it needs to be rested. And as far as representation, believe it or not, we out here. We out here. And we're looking for you guys. We're like, where y'all at? Like we're welcoming you. And you know, a lot of times when you're looking for to find someone who you can identify with, Psychology Today. You can go to Psychology Today. You can even type in providers of color on Facebook, and you'll see things that will pop up and give you a lot of resources. So just know that we're here. We're in this fight together. You know, the goal is to live and to live well. So I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity again.
Yeah, likewise, everything that's been said so far, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. And like Latanya said, there is a group of us out there. We are available. There's even a Facebook page. I think it's like the Connecticut
Connecticut.
BIPOC Healing Therapist, something along those lines. Where, you know, it is a group of us and we do send each other referrals. So if we are contacted by, you know, someone looking for a particular therapist, we have ways to make sure that people get connected to the right therapist for them. And thanks again for today. I appreciate it.
Siobhan, Latanya, Jackie, thank you so much for making the time today to join us on the panel. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your insights. Thank you for expanding my mind and you know the information I have. From a completely selfish note, like I said, I could do this for hours. So thank you again. And thank you for everyone who decided to tune in today. Make sure to spread the word because this conversation will be available on multiple channels through the West Hartford Chamber and through West Hartford Public Access. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Be safe, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Very much appreciate the conversation. So I just want to, you know, once again, give a big shout out to our panelists. And if anybody's interested in getting involved with the Minority Business Network, you can find out more information through our website, whchamber.com. We do host a monthly meetup at Luna Pizza on Farmington Avenue, the fourth Friday of every month. So it's a great way to make some new friends, get involved. Maybe that's a great connection point if you're looking to break out of your shell. We also host the Colorful Conversations on a quarterly basis. Our next one will be coming up in December. Details and topics to be announced at a later date, but we would love to have everyone's involvement with the work that this committee does. Thank you.
Recording stopped.